Here's my short story based on a true experience called The Football Match. The snow had been falling all morning, and by the afternoon, all that you could see was white. The dustbins were buried, the milk bottles were invisible, and snow ran along the rooftops, and every car was wrapped in white like a ribbon. James rubbed the frost from his bedroom window and peered out in amazement at the scene before him. It looked so cold that he nearly jumped back into bed. The trees were frozen and forlorn, and soon that he knew that he would be. Today was the day of the football match, and all of the hopes that he had that it might be called off were fading like the sunshine. He dressed quickly, pulling on his uniform and breathing out gasps of cloudy air, his breath hanging like a dark portent. His dad was already at work, and he kissed his mum and packed his sandwiches and kit into his already stuffed bag. As soon as he opened the front door, his eyes watered and he saw the brittle trees wilt under the weight of the merciless snow. He slowly and reluctantly trudged through the deep, hard snow. He looked up in wonder at the bright blue, icy sky, and a robin bobbed and whistled in the brambles. It looked like a Christmas card, but behind it there was the reality of him running around in his skimpy shorts with his knees knocking. The snow fell heavier and it was hard to see anything as the big white blobs fell onto his hair and eyes like confetti. Surely we can't be playing in this, he thought miserably and hopefully. James trudged reluctantly to the playing fields and his boots crunched on the hard ground. To his dismay, everyone else was changed with enthusiasm in the grim grey changing rooms. James changed quickly and rolled up his fat orange socks, which briefly warmed his legs, and then he fastened his two big football boots as tight as possible. He was dreading going out onto the pitch, but he knew that he had to keep that to himself. He didn't want to sound like a wimp in front of his teammates. He was still hoping against hope that the game would be cancelled. His knees were knocking even more, and he knew worse was to come. It didn't take long for him to find out. He walked out onto the frozen ground like a lamb to the slaughter. The snow had stopped falling except for the occasional wisps that passed in front of his eyes, as if mocking him. He jumped up and down on the spot in a vain effort to keep warm. He could see the other players running around and shouting and chasing after the ball like madmen. Their enjoyment just made things worse. He began to daydream, and a thought passed through him. He didn't know how he had happened to be a goalkeeper. It had just happened, but he knew that it hadn't been his idea, and resentment began to grow in him like a bad seed. The beautiful sky was a momentary distraction. It was then that he was startled by a whistling sound. It passed over him, and then a clanging sound and shouting from his teammates brought him back to earth. He realized that the icy ball had passed over his head and thwacked against the crossbar, and now it had fallen before him like a gift. He looked up at the charging, shouting players and picked up the ball, and he wondered what to do with it. His boots felt big and floppy like a clown's. He could still feel the cold through his green gloves as he picked up the snow-covered ball. He lifted it up in the air and he gave it an almighty kick. As soon as he did, he regretted it. It was like kicking a stone. Unbeknownst to him, his foot had gone to sleep, and when he made contact with the ball, the pain was unbearable. His poor foot felt hot and cold at the same time, and that it would shatter like glass. James fell onto the floor with tears coming out of his eyes, holding his stricken foot and willing the pain to go away. Lucky the ball had travelled far and it was being kept at the other end. James didn't care what the spectators thought as he writhed on the floor in agony. His foot felt dead as if it didn't belong to him. He tried pulling up his socks, but his fingers were so cold that it was impossible to get a good grip. He blinked the snow from his eyelids and it fell and melted in his mouth like ice cream, and he couldn't help licking at it like a cat with its tongue. Luckily for him, the ball was being knocked about at the other end of the field. He wasn't looking forward to diving onto the hard ground like concrete. He, he started to wish that he had been persuaded to try a pleasant indoor sport like tennis. As a little life came back into his tender foot, he looked over at the crowd of 10 supporters, and they looked happy to be turned into snowmen. He smiled at the thought. He watched as the icy ball travelled back and forth ping pong like. He began to wish that he was back home, drinking a hot chocolate, comfortable and warm. Then, to his relief, the halftime whistle blew, and he slowly walked towards the halfway line. His foot still hurt with each step, and he tried his best not to limp. All of his teammates were sucking oranges as if their lives depended on it, but he didn't think that his chapped lips could take the sting. With each sip, he felt that he was slowly coming back to life, as all his teammates were laughing and joking, but James stood apart like a frozen statue. With the sharp blast of the whistle, the game resumed. The snow was now just wisps, as if the clouds had exhausted themselves. He watched the players running around madly chasing the ball, but he didn't care about the result. He just wanted to be back at home, warm and secure. It was hard for him not to get bored as he watched the action from a distance. Then suddenly the ball was booted high into the air, and then it was passed from man to man until it came into his goal area. James steadied himself and concentrated on the ball. He didn't want to dive, but he knew that he would have to eventually. His heart was beating and sweat poured from his brow. He felt like a condemned man, and in a way he was. Thwack, the sound of a boot on the ball. It came towards him like a missile. He had no time to think, and he threw himself at the ball with an outstretched hand. The ball bent his fingers back, and he crashed to the ground like a buffalo. He turned his head, and he was amazed to see the ball slowly and shyly rolling towards him. He stretched out his arm like a savior, and he pulled the ball closer to him. The thunder of the players rang in his ears as they ran towards him. He held onto the ball with a vice-like grip. Slowly he rose to his feet, and his teammates were slapping him on the back, and the snowy spectators were cheering and stamping their feet in glee. This time James didn't risk kicking the ball. He threw it to the nearest player. He was a hero, and he liked the feeling. The minutes dragged on, but the end was coming, he thought happily. Then the whistle blew. It wasn't the end, it was a penalty. There had been no goals, and it had been a boring game, but now victory was in their sights. James watched excitedly as the ball was placed on the penalty spot, and his teammate ran towards the ball as if in slow motion, and then he struck it hard. James watched as it sailed through the air, silent against the liquid blue sky. He was sure it would miss. It didn't. The ball hit the back joyously and then slid down. The crowd and his teammates jumped for joy. To his surprise, he found himself doing the same, and for the first time he found that he was enjoying himself. The warmth had come back to his feet, and when the final whistle blew, he walked off the pitch a hero. He walked home in the swirling snow, but now he didn't care or feel the cold. He was smiling. It hadn't been a total disaster after all, he thought. And when he drank his hot chocolate and felt the steam warm his hands, he knew that he had come of age.